What historical fact blows your mind? In the 1870 Paraguayan War, Paraguay's losses amounted to 70% of their entire male population, civilian and military. Women weren't exempt either. They just fared slightly better. Overall population loss was about 60%. It took several decades before they were considered to have recovered. The reasons for the war are almost as bizarre as the outcome. Paraguay was a ducking weird country. Not many countries try to force interbreeding of native and European populations to make everyone mixed race. And when I say force, I mean it. Paraguay, for a time, actually made it illegal to marry within your own race. Wikipedia. Org wiki mestizoshparaguay. Fewer still will close their borders to the outside and to the inside. If you were a foreigner caught within Paraguayan borders, you had to live in Paraguay forever. And, strangest of all, most countries, when faced with imminent war with two regional powers and a third ally of this, in this case Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, would try to find a diplomatic solution. Unless you're Paraguay. If you're Paraguay, you declare war on them and conduct a drawn-out guerrilla war that sees your population drop by 60% minus 70%. I mean, this was a nation of some 500,000 people declaring war against an alliance of 11 million. Yeah, it's not like they were invaded by the alliance. They declared war on the alliance. London Underground opened during the American Civil War. That at the same time the U.S. Civil War was going on, which killed about 600,000 people and served as probably our greatest national tragedy. China was in the throes of the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion is the largest civil conflict in human history, and best estimates put the death toll somewhere north of 20 million. Really reminds you of just how many more people live in Asia. The number of aircraft destroyed during WWII is greater than the number of aircraft that currently exist in the entire world today. In the late 1800s, writers complained that young adults are losing touch with reality. Instead of sitting at the dinner table with family, they have their noses buried in a magazine. Apostrophe. A man survived both atomic bombs in Japan. At Tsutomu Yamaguchi. It is very funny indeed. After the first bomb dropped, next morning, either in shock or not aware of the situation, he woke up and went to the work in Nagasaki where another A-bomb dropped and survived both of them. Those are not like two regular work days. You don't believe what happens in the work today. A lot of things happened at different times to what people think, and eras we think of as being distinct blur into each other. When the Taj Mahal was built in 1632, the Portuguese had already been in control of Goa, a different part of India, for over 100 years. Virginia was founded in 1607, when Shakespeare was still alive. Between 1613 and 1620, around the same time as Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. Japanese Samurai Wikipedia. Orgwiki Hasekura Tsuneniga, called Hasekura Tsuneniga, sailed to Rome via Mexico, where he met the Pope, and was made a Roman citizen. It was the last official Japanese visit to Europe until 1862. The last major cavalry charge took place in 1942. Wikipedia. Orgwiki Chargi of Savoia Cavalleria at Izbushinsky, on the eastern front of the Second World War. After being shot during a duel, Andrew Jackson lived with a bullet next to his heart for 39 years. Edit. As a fellow Redditor pointed out, Jackson was shot first and calmly kept his composure and ended up killing the man. When speaking to an astonished friend after the incident, he stated, "If he had shot me through the brain, sir, I should still have killed him." Apostrophe. How deplorable the conditions were just being in the Royal Navy in the 17th century. You would work in disgusting, stupidly dangerous conditions, had more than a 50% chance of dying, and after 3 years of this, they would find an excuse not to pay you at all. This is why a lot of them became pirates. There was a saying that the only difference between prison and the Navy is that in the Navy you might drown too. It is believed that the human population dipped as low as 1,000 people about 70,000 BCE. We could very well have been a few stillbirths or saber-tooth maulings away from extinction. When reduced to such low numbers, the survival of a species truly teeters on a knife's edge. It's a difference of a handful of births. Too few and you dip below minimum viable population. Our survival could have come down to something as trivial as some tribe finding a spring or gazelle in the nick of time. Yes, it's thought that extremes of climate in Eastern Africa forced humans to divide into small, isolated groups. We came back from the brink, reunited, and populated the world. Sheet's crazy. Epcot, the entire theme park at Walt Disney World, was built in 3 years. It takes longer to get new shopping plazas finished today. Largest construction job in the world at the time. I teach history at a high school and I realized today that we've been using guns in war for close to 600 years. Also sort of poetic to think that the world's first giant artillery weapon, the Dardanelles gun, ended the Roman Empire. Kind of poetic with the advance of technology in this classical empire being destroyed by the first early modern siege. Just learned this in my history class today. There are no more living veterans of WWI, but there are still 20,000 alive widows of WWI veterans. I'm not sure whether this one has been posted here or not, so I'm going to post it anyway. Stalin, Freud, Hitler, Tito and Trotsky all lived within a few miles of each other in downtown Vienna for a brief period in 1913. WW1 began a year later, catalyzing the trajectory of these five to fame and infamy. Imagine if they had bumped into each other at the time. The imagination of these five being friends and then working together makes my mind run wild. Source: http BBC. Commerce Magazine 21,859,771 edit. Added the source. It's estimated that Genghis Khan killed approximately 40 million people in his lifetime. It's also estimated that when he slaughtered the city of Urgench, he killed over 1 million people in approximately 6 months. He had a habit of conquering a city, rounding up all the prisoners, then dividing the prisoners by the number of people in his army, and giving each soldier that number of people to march off and behead. The loss of life in the world wars, around 38 million in WW1, and around 60 million in WW2. Just thinking about how catastrophic and damaging that must have been for people and communities is something I just can't comprehend. In WW1 buddy battalions were common in Britain, where they would recruit and keep men together from local areas, the idea being that the connection would help morale and bring them together. Just looking at the dead from the Battle of the Somme, 72,000 plus people died from the UK and Commonwealth. Entire battalions wiped out. Entire villages and towns losing all their men and boys. Hundreds of families who knew each other, who all on the same day find every recruited soldier from that area has died. The loss must have been unimaginable. General Charles Lee was obsessed with his dogs to the point that he basically treated them like his children. Mr. Spada was his Pomeranian and favorite, and he routinely used to write paragraphs of his regular correspondence with John Adams Founders Archives. Gov Documents Adams 06-03-02-0094, like they were from Mr. Spada. He also once refused to speak to Abigail Adams until she shook Spada's paw hello, and someone once said he would have been a great politician if his constituents each possessed 4 legs and a tail. Dude just loved puppies more than people. That the Roman Empire existed for over 2,000 years in one form or another, and there were people calling themselves Romans until the 1800s. 1. Julius Caesar was once kidnapped by pirates. He laughed at the ransom they were demanding and ordered them to increase it. He made them listen to his poetry and berated them if they complained. He threatened to crucify them, and once he was set free he did just that. 2. Olga of Kiev, her husband was murdered by a rival tribe. Said tribe tried to get her to marry one of their men and she agreed. She invited them over and had her servants dig a hole and burned the visitors alive. Then she sent pigeon and sparrows with sulfur tied to their legs into the village and burned it to the ground. She was a bad bitch. I'm glossing over all of this. I could be wrong, but this is what I remember. Pluto didn't even get to complete one orbit around the sun between the time it was discovered and the time it was declassified as a planet. Alexander the Great defeated Darius II of the Persian Empire, the largest empire in the world at the time, by meeting them in the field in open combat. and he did it twice. In the first battle, he was outnumbered 7-1. In the second battle, he was outnumbered 10-1, and he ducking decimated the Persians. Edit, Darius III. Germany paid off the last of its World War I reparations in 2010. Persian leader Cambyses II used cats to defeat an Egyptian army. He had his soldiers paint cats on their shields and brought hundreds of cats and other animals that the Egyptians held sacred to the front lines. The Egyptians refused to fight the cat army and were easily defeated because of it. Source: http ancient U article 43. At the Battle of Mont Cassino in 1944, the 222nd Artillery Supply Company under the Polish 2nd Corps had a bear named Wojtek that would bring artillery shells to forward gun positions. Let me repeat that. A Metherdukine bear would fetch them artillery shells. Edit, Wojtek to Wojtek. Not actually a Polish speaker. Edit 2. For all people making Soviet jokes, I feel obligated to mention that this unit served under the British Army and was composed of men who had been released from Soviet gulags and labor camps. Edit 3. Post auto-corrected Mont Cassino to Mont Cassino. Not only did John Adams and Thomas Jefferson die within hours of one another, it was on July 4th, the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. More bombs were dropped on the country Vietnam during Vietnam War than were dropped throughout the entirety of World War II across the globe. That the Mongols lost to the Japanese in 2 invasions, both times due directly to a typhoon. Thanks, Bill Words. The last person born in the 1800s just died. Unless you live to 2100s, you're never going to meet a person who has lived in 3 centuries. This person lived through WW1, WW2, Vietnam, 911, Titanic, Jim Crow laws and their repeal, Prohibition and its repeal, women's rights, especially voting, the rise of flappers, the rise of twerkers, the Great Depression, the moon landing, the Dust Bowl, rock and roll, hippies, pop, rap, electro, Frank Sinatra, Elvis, the Beatles, Michael Jackson, Babe Ruth, Muhammad Ali, every Super Bowl, every World Series, Kennedy's assassination, television, remotes, airplanes, the internet, cell phones, virtual reality video games, man-made drugs. The end of Russia, the rise and fall of Czechoslovakia, the end of the Soviet Union, the end of Ottoman Empire, and the creation of 5 states. Not to mention that when they were born they were the youngest person, and when they died as the oldest person, there was a completely different set of people on the planet than when they were born. This person lived through some of the most significant moments in human history. Truly blows me away. Edit, I mistook the Prussian Empire for ending in the 1900s. However, she did witness the rise and fall of Yugoslavia, the rise and fall of Tibet, the rise and fall of East Germany, and the rise and fall of Rhythm Nation. And another interesting point, she was old for most of her life. I'm in my early 20s. When my grandmother was a child, living in the South, an elderly neighbor would tell grandma about how, when she was herself a little girl, she remembered seeing the Confederate troops march by in the Civil War. It's so strange to think that an event which seems so distant really happened within 2 human lifespans. Edit, to clarify, this is the southern US. That humans have been around for about 200,000 years, but we only have written records dating back 6,000. 97% of humankind's history is lost. The first person to use the phrase "what the Dickens" was Shakespeare. The ancient Phoenicians had a number system that went from 1 to 60. For them to write 61, they would have written 11. The same people invented the measurement of the circle and decided that there are 360 degrees around the circle. The Boy Scout handbook says, if you hold your hand out at arm's length, 1 finger width is about 1 degree of arc, circle measurement. Till there are societies alive today that don't have any number system. They think with the concept of a few or many. That Oxford University is older than the Aztec civilization. That Cambridge University is older than the Easter Island Heads. And that Oxford is so old no one knows when it was actually founded. They only know people were teaching there as of 1096, but don't know how long that had been going on. 189 Swiss Guard defending the Holy See in 1527. 10,000 Protestant mercenaries sacked the Vatican. The Vatican defenders were some militia and the Swiss Guard. All but 42 Swiss Guard sacrificed their lives to get the Pope to safety. 10th U.S. President John Tyler, born in 1790, has 2 living grandchildren. Reddit added context about who the guy was. It blows my mind that we first used a nuclear weapon, the peak form of weaponry, for battle purposes 72 years ago, and haven't used it since. Food. The way we eat today, particularly the variety, is completely unheard of historically. The main thing I like to remind people is even 100 years ago you'd go to your local market and buy and eat the plants that are in season. Imagine if you went to get a cheeseburger and they told you they didn't have tomatoes because it's not tomato season. You would look at them like they are crazy. But if you did the same thing during most of human history and demanded a crop that was out of season, they would look at you like you're the crazy one. Edit. I said 100 years because I didn't do any research and wanted to leave a bit of a safety margin. As many pointed out, this change is way more recent. You Baxter Bedford, much more recent than 100 years ago. Refrigerated trucking really didn't become widespread until the 1960s. Even when I was a kid, many foods were much more seasonal. Apostrophe. I'm not sure if you could call it a historical fact or just a thought on history, but it's absolutely insane to me to think how fast computers have injected themselves into our lives. I was talking to my father about it. He was born in the 50s, and to your everyday working Joe like his father, they weren't even a concept or a thought. It's weird to think that in a span of 25 to 35 years is when computers just started to become used in businesses more regularly. Thinking about that time span is wild. My father, in his mid-60s, was my age when computers first started to become mainstream. His grandma, my great-grandma, shared a community line with everyone around the farming area. Now almost everyone carries around miniature computers that power our ability to communicate, read about and perceive the world. My nieces and nephews can navigate YouTube, something I don't think my mid-60s mother can do with any real skill. 117 years ago, the concept of a computerized device allowing you to communicate with anyone in the touch of a few buttons would be science fiction. And going back even further, it'd start to become straight up witchcraft or sorcery. Watch, peasants from the 1750s, as I conjure on my device the image of individuals engaging in sexual acts.